Hello, and welcome to the second day of our Highlights of FMX 1994 to 2020 online interview series. My name is Mario Müller. I'm one of the program managers of FMX, and I will be your host today. We're happy you're all joining us today. Thank you very much. Those of you who are with us in the interactive room can use the chat function on the right side of the screen to send in your questions at any time during the show, and we will do our best to pass them on to our interview guest. Please note that to avoid background noise, we have muted all of your microphone signals. Today would have been the second day of the FMX 2020 conference in Stuttgart, Germany, which we had to cancel because of the lockdown. FMX, as you know, is all about knowledge and about community. People from all over the world meet over 4 days to exchange their knowledge, their ideas and opinions, be they professional or social. And to keep this exchange alive in the FMX community until we can all meet again in person, we want to offer the members of the community, and that's you, opportunities to get to know people who have been associates and many times friends of FMX for years. One of FMX's oldest friends, and we will talk about why a little later, is my interview guest today, Volker Engel. Volker is the co-founder and president of Uncharted Territory, a production company and visual effects house from Los Angeles. Volker is, of course, best known for his work as visual effects supervisor on Independence Day, for which he received an Academy Award in 1997 and many more blockbusters for director Roland Emmerich, all the way to Independence Day Resurgence. But Volker is a man of many talents. Besides supervising world-class visual effects, he develops, writes, and produces projects, and I hope to hear more about those later in our interview. So I'm very happy to welcome to this Highlights of FMX interview Emmy and Oscar winner and downright great guy, Volker Engel.
Hello, Mario. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
Hello, Volker. It's very good to see you, and thank you for being on the show with us and spending an hour with us, telling us a bit about who you are, what you do, what you've been doing, and where you're going to go from here. Let me start by asking a first, more personal question. How are you doing in these extraordinary times?
Personally, I'm doing okay. Of course, there's a lot of restrictions here in California. But the fact that my wife, Geza, who is a producer, and myself have been doing a lot of home office lately anyway, the change was not that great for us. And of course, like everybody, we miss socializing, we miss visiting friends, having friends over for dinner. And that is something that is very dear to us, but we're hanging in there.
Yeah, you're right. I guess that's what we have to do. Hang in there, try to keep up with one another through social media, through video conferencing, through chats, opportunities like this one until we can all meet again in person. And let's hope very much that will be as soon as humanly possible. Volker, before we go on to the show, we have prepared a short clip made from some of the many presentations and interviews you have given over the years at FMX. And to get everybody warmed up, we would like to play the clip for our audience and then use it as a jumping board for the conversation. So let's play the clip, Spotlight on Volker Engel.
I always call our company a shapeshifter, and the reason is that for every single production that we approach, our company is tailored to that specific production. And we figured very early on that we wanted to start our company not as a visual effects company, but as a production company, and also work like a production company that would shoot a movie. You hire your DP, you hire your line producer, you hire a costume, etc., etc. And after the movie, everybody goes and does something else. And the advantage is that you have a lot of flexibility. You can hire the people when you need them. You don't have, let's say, a team of particle specialists sitting around and you need work for them. And you try to acquire something quickly from another show. Let's do these 20 shots so our people have work. We're never ever in that situation. Many people we worked with and who liked working with us actually have their contracts in a way with other companies that they can get out. And or make it more short term, like 3 months, or maybe they then do another 3 months and so on. So there's a core team that we keep working with, people that come back to us because they like the atmosphere, they like working with us. The director and the producers have their offices, and then we are there with our guys, of course, visual effects, editorial, but that's also the key thing. We actually want to work together very closely with editorial and post-production and have everything under one roof. And as you know, it's not just about being on the phone with people. It's like you meet them in the hallway, or you actually go into the room and you have a quick chat. You solve things really fast. So there's never this, yeah, we can look at it next Tuesday, or sometimes we even immediately run upstairs to Roland and say, here's the first version of a big shot. You should come and have a look at it, give your notes quickly. So it's all about being flexible and interactive. It helps me a lot that I have a very close relationship with Roland Emmerich, with the director. We've done many movies previously together. So if I take Independence Day Resurgence as an example, I get the script in a stage or in a phase where probably the studio even hasn't read it yet, because I just have to start that early of coming up with a breakdown. It would be different if it would be another director, because I've done several movies with him previously, so I get an idea of where he wants to go with certain sequences. And then of course it's your own experience that comes into play, where you come up with the first rough breakdown, where you yourself have to come up with the numbers also of, this could be a $2,000 A/B composite, or could be a $5,000 A/B composite, or it's a $120,000 full CG, the whole kitchen sink kind of shot. And then he keeps asking me questions about, like, why did you put this here, why did you put this here? And then I explained it to him. Most of the time he actually goes, yeah, you're right. So, okay, let's cut this out, let's move this here, and let's change this around. And then eventually we come up with a number that's sort of in the ballpark where he knows the studio is not going to balk. There's only a handful of companies in the world that can realize, that can actually do a certain shot. If it's a super complicated full CG, all bells and whistles kind of shot, there's companies you cannot go to and have them do it. It's really only, like ABCD, okay. And then you go like, okay, these two companies are working on what gigantic movie at the moment when we actually are going to need them? Okay, they will not be able to do it. And so all of a sudden you have, let's say, 3 different ones that you can still go to. And then of course you have sometimes a scene or a sequence that have 20 specific shots where you're just dead set on a certain company. And frankly, a lot of times it has to do with the fact you worked with them before. It was a fantastic experience, great people, very creative. We had something that I remember as sort of the forefather of the FMX, which became the film and Medienbörse, where you could apply for actually have a little stand and present yourself and your material in a little showreel, and everybody was interested and could come by and have a look at that. And I know, Andreas, you were there too, and myself, and I had this demo video that of course was playing from a VHS tape that started with a big sentence, because it says, if you think you cannot do visual effects in Germany, and it would fade out and then fade in again, think again.
You have no idea how difficult it was to pick interview moments from the many, many things you've done at FMX over the years. So I decided to just take the last two interviews and find the nuggets in those. But I had to put in the very last shot where you talked about your very, very first experience in what was in a way the predecessor of FMX. As you mentioned, the name at the time was the Film- und Medienbörse, which translated into English would be the Film and Media Exchange. And if you take the first three letters out of those, that adds up to FMX, which is the title of the conference to this very day. So, yeah, funny but true. And you would be one of the people to know about that, and I would be too, because I was there at the time as well. So it's been a long journey. It's been 25 plus years, and that actually brings me to the first question. If you could, in a nutshell, because we could talk about that alone for like half an hour, I guess, how you made your first steps into the industry, or how you even like how did you go into the industry from being a student?
Okay, yeah. I enjoyed the clip a lot. It's especially funny if you see yourself with, the long hair, the glasses I was wearing back in the day, and to complete change, cutting back and forth. The beginnings, yes. I was aware of Roland Emmerich, and he had done at that point I think 3 movies in Germany, and the one that influenced me most was in Germany was called the Noah's Ark's Principle, about a space station that was able to influence weather on Earth, and I must have been 17 maybe when that came out, and it was, funny enough, his thesis film from the Munich Film School that was a feature, and it was released theatrically in Germany. But I was so impressed that, of course, I kept on thinking about how can I meet this director, because he seems to be the only one who's doing visual effects in Germany. And so regarding the question how to go from student to work in the business, for me, funnily enough, it was exactly parallel, because I applied at the Academy of Fine Arts this was before the Film Academy existed, in Stuttgart. And I found out that when I moved there as a student, when I started my studies in the direction of animation, the Academy of Fine Arts back in the day, I think we're talking 1986-ish, was the only school that had an animation class that Professor Ade, who later founded the Film Academy in Ludwigsburg, was offering. And so I applied there, and I started my studies. At the same time, of course, I knew that Roland Emmerich was from Stuttgart, and but I didn't have a direct connection. But this is little anecdotal thing that I just have to tell you, because what was really funny was I first. It was sort of a 3-step process. First, I met a gentleman called Olaf Rappold, who gave courses on the history of science fiction films, and he told me about a production designer called Oliver Scholl, who had just done some work for Roland Emmerich's previous film, who was a student, Oliver, a student himself back in the day. And through these two gentlemen, I met Roland. They talked to him, and they told him about me, and that I was into film tricks, as we call it in Germany, visual effects. And then the weirdest thing happened when I asked them, so where could I meet him? Where's his office? It turned out that his office was about 300 meters away from where I had my room as a student in the middle of the city of Stuttgart. I had no idea. My bus stop was right in front of Roland's office window, where I was standing pretty much every morning for almost a year, not knowing that. So that was sort of a really, really weird coincidence. So they told him about me, and I had, this is the crazy part, I had worked between when I was 16 and 21. I had worked on one huge project that had stop motion robots, it had spaceship miniatures. Of course, I was heavily influenced by Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica back in the day. And I, at some point after several years, and I had spent about 2 years writing a screenplay and then building miniatures, and I didn't have a team. I just did it all on my own, and wanted to create this by myself. After 5 years, what I had was a documentary that I put together about my approach and how I was doing all that stuff. And I had done all that on Super 8 film stock. I transferred it to a VHS tape. And on my second visit with Roland, I gave this tape to him and he watched it. And the next time we met, he said, and I quote, I think you're crazy enough to work with us. And so that was the beginning of it all.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And it's also interesting because it's a personal story and not like a business story. But I guess those were the days. He was in Stuttgart. You were in Stuttgart. I was in Stuttgart at the time because we all ended up working with the two of us at least, on the same film for Roland Emmerich, which was the last film he did in Germany, at least German finance, called Moon 44. And I'm not going to speak for you, but I worked my ass off, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And shockingly, it even reinforced my interest in not just in film, but in working in film, no matter how hard the work is. Sometimes I went back home so exhausted that one day my father said, filmmaking must be the second hardest job in the world other than oil drilling, and he may have a point. So I was wondering, after that, after Moon 44, after studying at Film Academy, there was this moment where you got a phone call from Roland Emmerich when he was already in Los Angeles, and he was prepping a film, which ended up being Independence Day. And he asked you to join him on the film in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. And do you have any idea, I'm sure you do, why he called you and asked you specifically to join him on the film to become the visual effects supervisor on a major Hollywood film? Yes.
So, of course, the best answer would be you have to ask him yourself. But from what I remember, how it all came about was Roland and I got along very well during the making of Moon 44, and he saw that I was. How do you say it? Like young and hungry, because I was 23, I think, when we started Moon 44, and then I had a bit of a stint. There was some miniature work in the movie Universal Soldier, so I was working on that, and but of course he had a big team assembled around him. For the movie Stargate, which I did not work on, and he then after that called me and said, I think we really had a good thing going when we worked together in Germany. Are you interested in joining me for the next movie we're doing, Independence Day? And of course, you have to think back in a way that nobody knew what that was back in the day. It was basically, you're reading the screenplay, and Roland described it to me as it's kind of a War of the Worlds-ish story, only with gigantic attack ships that are 15 miles in diameter, hovering above all the big cities. And so I was like, okay, that sounds like a really interesting thing. And I packed 2 suitcases, and I went over to Los Angeles. And at the same time, I also have to say that we had, at that point, he had gotten to know a motion control specialist / director of photography, Doug Smith, who I think Doug had started out on Star Wars, talking about episode 4. And so he was a seasoned guy by that point already. And then Roland and Dean Devlin had this idea of, why don't we take Volker, who's really a specialist in model photography, which Roland knew from Moon 44, and Doug Smith, who's fantastic director of photography regarding shooting miniatures, and we teamed them up as the visual effects supervisors for Independence Day. So that's how that came about. And I think it was more about, knowing Roland a bit, what he never liked was working with somebody who would say like, oh yeah, we've done this for the last 20 years like that. Why don't we do it again? And he would always love to work with somebody who would say, okay, let's think out of the box here. Let's think how we can do this more efficient, maybe even with a technology that some people wouldn't want to use anymore, and but it's just perfect for this specific sequence. Right. So I think you put this all together, and that's the answer.
So he was after fresh blood in a way. You were mentioning that he was looking for people to approach some problems out of the box. Is that because he had specific ideas how to bring those to the screen, or just because he felt like the way it was being done at the time by the established people in Hollywood, and at the time it was probably like a group of like a few dozen and maybe 100 people, not like today where it's like literally thousands and thousands, where he would say, this seems to be not efficient, or this seems to be backwards, because again, going back to the fresh blood idea, how would he be able to expect that you would come up with new approaches, being like the new guy in the room? But let me have another question on that. Was there any indication before or during the production on Independence Day that it would become the movie sensation that it ended up being, like breaking box office records and putting Roland Emmerich and yourself square on the map? Was there any feeling, yeah, we're onto something here, other than a lot of work?
Yeah, to answer that first, not at all. While you're working on the movie, and you're totally focusing on getting the work done. There's no thought about how is this going to play, and I think everybody can in the business can attest to that there's no real thinking about how is this going to play. You just try to make the best work, and then you're lucky enough with someone like Roland as a director. You have somebody who has the movie edited in his head already, and that was something that was always fantastic when we would set up a shot, and he could tell you exactly, oh, don't worry about when, say, like the plane is leaving the runway. I've cut out by that. We're already inside the cockpit, and things like that. So that helps a lot to not, produce any waste, anything that you won't see. There's this little story about 20th Century Fox, after we had done the movie, later coming to us and said, hey, we need deleted scenes. We need the stuff that you shot or they were halfway done, and that you could actually then put on the DVD. and or probably VHS even at that point. And he Roland was thinking really hard about it, and we put our heads together, and we couldn't come up with anything. There was one little piece, I think it was a single shot or two shots or so that we had done, which were not used, but otherwise there was nothing. And going back to what you were saying earlier about Roland having an idea about techniques and how to use them, it always reminds me of when Dennis Muren talks about George Lucas having this approach way early on, when George Lucas was not that educated about visual effects that he was later, and he was talking about, let's throw models past the camera and shoot them in slow motion, or have them on sticks and have them fly by, and all different kinds of things that might have worked for some shots, but not for the more complicated ones. And there was a somewhat similar approach in '95 when we started Independence Day, where Roland said, let's see when we show jet fighters how far we can push the miniature technology and actually having them on invisible wires, like a marionette, and have them fly by, also shoot slow motion, or move the camera, have a painted photo backdrop. And we did tests. Those were really early tests that we did. But we found out really fast that we can do establishing shots, which we later did. There's several of Air Force One in the movie where it's on invisible fishing wires, and the camera is slowly moving, so it looks like it's shot from another plane, and the background is a blown up photo, and we created some atmosphere with smoke to make it a bit more realistic. But those were the things that Roland came up with, for example.
I see. That's interesting. When you were working on the film, and obviously you had read the script at the time, and you had probably seen production paintings, were you intimidated by the scale and the ambition of the project, or did you feel like, well, we'll just take it one step at a time?
Intimidated in one way. Intimidated because I got to work with some of my heroes that I already knew from Germany, from other movies. So pick out Joe Viscoso, who unfortunately is not with us anymore, but as the pyrotechnical specialist. And of course, I knew that Joe had worked on Star Wars, and that he had worked on Terminator, and so that was a big deal for me to come in there. This young guy, I had just turned 30 at that point. This young guy from Germany coming in, doing his first big movie, and being the visual effects supervisor. Basically, telling those guys how it was. The intimidation was not so much generally making the movie, because I had some people that I knew had my back. First of all, Roland, which I always knew I could go to and tell him, listen, we can't do it like this, but I have an idea if we do it like that, and would you be okay with that, and so on. As long as he wouldn't just hear like, no, this can't be done, and I have no idea what we're doing. I mean, you have to come up with a solution, obviously. But that was great. I had already then my later business partner, my good friend Mark Weigert, who became a project manager on the show, who could always tell me where we were and how much we would have to accomplish that day. He implemented a great project management tool. And then what was really important for me was there was one additional person. His name is Bob Hurry, and he was hired as the visual effects production manager, and he became, it's actually really hard to describe, but I had the feeling I had my own personal bodyguard, and if I had the slightest sign of the flu coming up, he'd be the one who immediately sent somebody out to get some medicine. So you don't want Volker to get ill while we're shooting on 10 different things at the same time here. I would always remember that when we were on set on big miniature setups, and I was contemplating, and I was not very vocal. Let's put it this point in those days, and you have to also imagine here's this young dude from Germany, not so versed in the English language, and he would stand next to me and kind of look at me and go like, "What do you need?" And then I'd explain to him, I have to make sure that the set is ready for that, and this is ready for that, and then he'd sort of be the guy who would facilitate a lot of things, and that was just fantastic. We had this great collaboration.
That's wonderful. So he, in a way, had your back. I was curious, a very short question, frankly, about Joe Viscoso. Were you allowed to pick him and book him for the project, or was he already part of the team and then you learned that he would be somebody who would work for you?
When I arrived in LA during pre-production, which I believe, which sounds crazy, I think was 6 weeks away from actually starting to shoot the miniatures. I remember Roland talking to me and saying like, "Hey, about the pyro that we need to do for this show. I was thinking about Joe Viscoso. What do you think?" And I was like, "That's a great choice. I couldn't come up with any better choice."
Wonderful. I was wondering, because as you say, in a way, you were the new guy in the room, Mark as well. You were the young guys from Germany. When you joined Independence Day to do the visual effects, had somebody allotted a budget for the work to you, or did you even have to actually do the numbers and come up with the budget for the visual effects at a time where you may not have known exactly how to do that, at least at that scale?
Yeah. No, we had a visual effects producer. His name is Terry Clodio. And he came on board, and that was another great collaboration because he also took us, he was also very seasoned, and he took us very, very serious, as he also knew that we had this great rapport with Roland, and would know exactly, okay, if Volker says this and this is really what Roland wants. It's not something that I just came up with. And he definitely was the numbers guy, and would talk to the couple of visual effects houses that we worked on regarding the digital side, which was mostly compositing in those days, because it's tough to say, but it was about 80% was miniature that we did. So we always had several miniature teams working at the same time. And of course, he dealt with the numbers regarding the miniatures. So on the budget side, I didn't have to deal with that because I just did not have that experience that came later.
Well, thank God for that. I have an awards question. While you were working on Independence Day, did you ever consider the possibility that it would win you an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects while you were working on it?
No, and I tell you how this went. It came completely out of the blue. We were done with the movie, and we were walking on the 20th Century Fox lot one day. I think Roland, Dean, and myself, and then Roland said to me like, "Oh, so who do you think we should have as the fourth person who could be nominated for the visual effects?" And I said to him, "Nominated for what?" And he was like, "Well, you're Academy Award eligible, and with the movie, so What do you think? And so that's when it dawned on me. There's a real chance, at least, our names would be thrown into the hat and see what happens. But never ever during the making of the movie.
Right. And then just out of curiosity, when he asked for the fourth name, I guess you would have been the first name on the list, and then he needed another three who would then be like on the short list. I don't know. You may still know them like off the top of your head. Who were the other three people?
The difficulty really was as the restriction is for 4 people, and it was pretty clear it would be myself, Doug Smith, as us being the co-supervisors on the show. And then I can immediately tell you, if there would have been a fifth slot, it would have been our miniature supervisor, who was responsible for building all the miniatures, who was supervising the model shop. And as this was a gigantic model show, he had a great responsibility, and his name is Mike Joyce. And he and his team did a fantastic job. But there was this suggestion, and I can say that I actually wasn't really consulted. There were these 4 names. The 2 other names was Clay Pinney, who was the special effects supervisor, who did all the mechanical effects and atmospheric effects and the large scale pyro that happened in the movie. And then of course there was Joe Viscoso, who did all the miniature pyro, which was gigantic. He was on the show from beginning to end. There was something, there was some kind of destruction that happened pretty much every day. So those were those 4 names that came up, and of course they were discussed with Doug and myself, and it seemed to make the most sense.
Do you remember what other films were in competition for the Best Visual Effects Oscar in that year that you went up against?
Yes. Yeah, something you never forget. Twister was one competition. And the interesting thing is, the great Stefan Fangmeier, a colleague of mine, was visual effects supervisor on that movie. So you had another German even being up for an Academy Award. And the third movie, as back in the day, it was only 3 nominations. Now you have 5 nominations. But the third one was Dragonheart. And the interesting thing was the 2 other movies were both big ILM shows. And of course, we said, well, those guys are the best. And they also have a great following when it comes to voting. So, don't really think that we newcomers that nobody had even heard about would stand a chance. So that's why when it came to the point where the nominations went out, we thought like, let's see, let's be very positive about it, but let's not really count on it.
Well, I guess you had something going for you, which was the film was a phenomenon at the box office, and I guess nobody would have expected such a fun picture to be so successful and, in a way, well told, in my own personal opinion. And also, I think everybody realized the sheer size of the project, of the things that were on screen, those huge spaceships, miles and miles large, was something that people had never seen, at least not that convincingly on screen ever before. And that brings me to my next question. I have read somewhere, and I want to hear it from you, that apparently Independence Day was the largest model or miniature shoot ever in film history, at least until that point. Is that true?
It could be true. I can only tell you that Mark Weigert, as project manager, came up with this statistic that for the movie we shot about 4,000, I think more than 4,000 different miniature elements that then later, either big tabletop, the lunar landscape or something like that, or jet fighters that would do certain maneuvers. We had several shots also with CG jet fighters that we started on pretty late, but we had a tremendous amount of miniatures, and it was a 9-month miniature shoot. Half of it being done by Doug Smith, and half of it being done by myself. And I got to have all the fun with the destruction sequences and the high frequency photography, the slow motion stuff that we did.
Let's try and wrap up Independence Day, although obviously we could talk about this for a long time. Looking back, what other Roland Emmerich films that you worked on do stand out for you in hindsight, in remembering the work or the project or how the film turned out?
There's two projects come to mind. Of course, I could say immediately, well, they're all kind of my babies. I don't want to pick any particular one, but of course you have certain memories about certain projects. And 2012 was a fantastic project because it was just so far out. I mean, it's like, Roland coming in and saying, like, I'd like to do the disaster movie that ends all disaster movies. So there's a nice pitch, and especially for a visual effects supervisor, you're pretty gung-ho about, okay, yeah, let's do that. And for our company also, it was a fantastic project. This gives me the opportunity to point out the movie had a little over 1,300 visual effect shots and uncharted territory, which was not a known entity really, would form for a movie and that disbanded afterwards in a way that we even sold the computers and the monitors afterwards. But out of those 1,300 shots, we did 420 with our company, and amongst them, the really long earthquake sequence when the limousine drives through Los Angeles while everything falls apart. So it was not just like, we'll build an in-house unit and we have them do some smaller composites. This was really, really serious stuff that we did, and we hired everybody for the project. In the end, it was about 100 artists that we had, and then later, as I said, disbanded it. And of course, there were other fantastic work being done by other companies that worked on the movie. But this is a nice memory for me. And then the other one, because it was so completely different than anything else that we had done, is the movie Anonymous, which I can only recommend for anyone who hasn't seen it. Get the Blu-ray. Check it out. I don't know if it's streaming somewhere, but this was a labor of love that we did, and was just so different because it was about rebuilding London in the 16th century.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, my next question that I had even written down before was about Anonymous. Since Anonymous, being a labor of love of Roland Emmerich's that he wanted to bring to the screen for many years, he had a much smaller budget on that film. In what way did you have to adapt your working style to accomplish that? Not just to bring the visual effects to the film, but to convincingly portray a period London in a film like that, because there was no way of cheating it. It was either realistic or not. It was not about spaceships. Who knows what a spaceship looks like, particularly if it's thousands of miles large. So in what way did you have to reinvent your workflow and your tools to make it work for that film and for that much smaller budget?
Yeah, it was somewhat scary at first, but let's say in a good way. It was let's not say scary. Let's say tempting. It was something that would be a challenge that we knew from the get-go. And so Mark Weigert and I, we went in there as co-visual effect supervisors and co-visual effect producers. So that tells you already this was a much smaller budget. Also, we all had to, for a year, we had to move to Germany, back to our home country, and we took a handful of artists that we had worked with before that we knew would be the core of the visual effects unit that we would eventually set up. And for the longest time in Berlin, where the whole movie was made, and we did all the visual effects also on the studio lot where we had our rooms. We had 4, 5 artists and our IT specialist Jay Goulian, who always sets things up, always sets up our company basically for us for each project. And in the end, it was, of course, we didn't do all the effects. It was about 300 shots with just 4 or 5 artists. But for the longest time, it was like 5-6 months that we only had those guys, and they set up everything for us, even the buildings that we did for the London in the 16th century. And in the end, it was 28 artists, and then we had 8 people support staff and management, which of course super important. And our project manager would be Katharina Köpke, who's also German, but at that point lived in the US. My landline is ringing in the background. That shows you it's actually all live, and we're not going to cut it out. So this was a really small crew, and you could say this was also what keeps this project so memorable for me, because it's something that was very, very small scale, and the small scale was the thing that kept it manageable. It's great. Somebody's talking on my answering machine. And so this small realm made it so fantastic, because it was like a smaller family being together, and we had our barbecues in the back lot and so on. Everybody knew everybody. Those are the things that are so memorable about the project. We had a very close collaboration with the company Ion that is doing the compositing software Digital Fusion, and back in the day they even came over and we had a discussion about certain plugins that we would need, and there was just fantastic things that made, on the technology side, made things possible for us, like the River Thames was something where we could have 3D water in the compositing software. Back in the day when we did it, I think unheard of, that you could actually do it right in that package. And then there was another fantastic integration of particle smoke that we were able to do also in the 2D realm, and we did a lot of photogrammetry for for buildings. We're inside a big cathedral, and we just do a slight move. This is based on photos that Mark took at a cathedral in England, and in Salisbury Cathedral actually, and we would project it onto simple geometry. We had to find solutions, and then we also thought, like, is Roland going to be game? Is he going to be used to only working with really big budgets? But it was fantastic. I mean, he checked out the solutions that we would suggest, and if I would tell him, listen, we cannot afford to put
Well, let's hope that he comes back in a moment, as he did before. Sometimes we seem to have a bit of a problem with the line. I can already hear him somewhere.
Yeah.
And there we are back.
Okay, we're back.
Okay.
All right. So it was all about finding the best solution on a smaller scale, telling the same story. And a big challenge was that Roland had to go to the US for the actual post-production that we still did in Germany, because of financing, the money had to be spent there on the visual effects. And so we did our CineSync sessions with him in LA, us in Germany, and not having him there. So that was another challenge. But as we had this rapport by that time, that worked out nicely.
Well, I enjoyed that film very much, and the lack of budget certainly didn't hurt the film. I thought it all looked gorgeous, and it was a perfect part of a clever narrative. So I think it all worked out well. I've started to put away a few of my own questions to start going through questions that we're getting from the audience in the room. And there was one a bit further down that I'd like to go to, like there, yes, which it's by Viet. It says, could you please tell us a bit about your current projects and what are your perspectives for the future filmmaking?
Okay. Yes, I've been, as I said a little earlier, my wife is a producer, and we have been focusing on several projects. On most of these projects, we keep my visual effects expertise in mind. Let's put it this way, and so we know it's going to be doable, and we know there's a certain budget range that we can hit. But as I was actually explaining in the video clips that you played in the beginning, that Uncharted Territory was set up as a production company by Mark Weigert and myself originally in 1999. That's when we started. It was really all about coming up with a project, and we have this running joke where we said, like, Roland with his great projects sort of interrupted us making our own movies because it was just offers that we got from him that we couldn't refuse, and it was just fantastic projects to work on. But even on just before we did 2012, we had just finished development of a screenplay, and wanted to go into financing that, and then jumped onto 2012, and we're very lucky to do that, because Roland also offered us being co-producers on that movie, which for visual effects supervisors is a very, very rare, as we might know, possibility. And so what we're doing now is focusing on several projects, actually over the last couple of years, because obviously development takes some time. And we are working on projects with a good friend of ours who is a very famous German author. Her name is Cornelia Funke. You might know her from novels like Inkheart, The Thief Lord, Dragon Rider. And we have 2 feature projects developed with finished screenplays, that one of which is called Igraine, based on the book called Igraine the Brave, that is going to be an animated feature. And we have several television series planned on her properties. And we also have, especially for projects that are a bit more German-oriented, a producing partner, Lucia Schabatke in Germany, who we're working with. And that also is for several other projects that we're doing. I actually adapted to novels over the past years. One is a science fiction novel from a very well-known author, and another one is a much smaller one that Gesa and I just liked. We just loved the novel and got the rights to it. But then we also, as this is the time for television streaming, limited series, we have developed three concepts for limited series. And let me only tell you about one, which I'm very excited about. We are developing together with a company called Bavaria Fiction in Germany, and Oliver Vogel, the CCO of that company. And for those of you not in Germany, Bavaria is a company that did Das Boot, the original, and also the sequel miniseries, I think, available on Hulu. And so there was a science fiction television series called Space Patrol Orion in the 60s. So you have to imagine this is a little bit like our Star Trek. There was only 7 episodes produced, though, back in the day. And they have reruns and reruns and reruns, so it's kind of a cult phenomenon. And I've been working on doing this as a next generation project, as a follow-up for several decades to make sure this can be done and we get the rights. And now we finally got together with Bavaria, and I'm very excited about it. We wrote the concept for it, and so now we're ready to go with that one. But those are things very dear to my heart, because when I grew up, I saw the reruns on television of that series. So imagine, you watch Star Trek, and at some point somebody comes to you and says, like, hey, how about you do a next generation? And we're thinking about something that is more in the veins of what they did with Battlestar Galactica, for example, with a new show. I think now is just fantastic opportunities for a series like that.
Wow, that's exciting. I very much remember Space Patrol Orion as a kid, and as you say, you keep coming over it again on TV, and you just watch it because it's fascinating. I'm very much looking forward to how you can reinvent this in a way. I have a question from somebody in the audience by the moniker Oli Delmontovsky, and he asks, can you imagine doing a future project exclusively with German visual effects studios, which seems to be something that you're kind of hinting at anyway?
Yes, absolutely. We've been working with German companies over the last 10, 12 years, definitely. And also love to figure out how to work with new companies, smaller ones, boutique shops, etc., on projects. And we did the same thing on Independence Day Resurgence, for example. And there's frankly no difference quality-wise to big American, Canadian, etc. British companies. It's just fantastic talent that we now also have in Germany. So it's kind of funny thinking back about what we talked about in the beginning. If you think you can't do visual effects in Germany, think again. That was quite a while ago, and it's definitely true now. It's even more true than ever. And I've recently been a visual effects consultant on a limited series that right now, of course, because of the coronavirus, is put on, I'd call it slow motion, not on hold. And this is something where the financing scheme that this is being done with basically dictates that so and so much money has to be spent in Germany, and it's going to be all German visual effects houses that are going to work on that one. So there's your answer.
Excellent. It seems to be the right moment, as you say, with all the streaming services now working on content. And in a way, ironically, it seems like maybe this time right now of the lockdown does not only give you a chance as a producer to keep developing things, but for people who are in production usually, they may have a bit more time or an open ear for new things and new projects coming up. I have two questions that go in a similar direction. And could I see the question by Lily and by Alexander together? I'll read them to you slowly, one after the other, because they seem to be tending towards the same idea. So Lily writes, do you sometimes miss the way they used to make movie effects, like you said, working with simple tricks? And she does this. And the other one is by Alexander, who asks, do you think there's a trend in moving back from CGI to practical effects, like in Christopher Nolan's films, Mad Max Fury Road, or Blade Runner 2049?
Yeah, there's I'll answer both questions. There's a trend. I'd call it a small trend because at the same time, I've been in a similar situation where on bigger movies, independence and resurgence. For example, we were thinking about going back on doing several things in miniature, but there's always an economy of scale. It makes sense if you can do it for a sequence or even several, because miniatures have to be built. You have to get a team together to shoot this, and also a lot of people are involved. Unfortunately, on the Independence Day project, on Resurgence, it was always standalone stuff, and we had companies bid on it, and then we found out if you compare it to the digital side and doing it in CG, there was just no comparison. It was just way more expensive in that particular case. I have to be careful how I say that. But of course, I would love to do more. That's where I originally came from. That's how my eye was trained, and the fun about that, of course, is it's all haptic. It's you can take things in your hand and move them around and look through the camera, look on a monitor. Who looks through the camera? You look on a monitor, and what you see is what you get. But at the same time, it also means that you have to have a director. You have to work with a director. And let's say it's a seasoned director regarding visual effects. He's now going to be used to doing small changes until the very end. And of course, even when you shoot something with a miniature, you can add things, and of course that's something I love. Best of both worlds. You do something with miniatures and then add something digitally. It's a great example. The movie Moon not to be confused with Moon 44, did a lot of that. I really liked that. Yes, I certainly do miss that. At the same time, over the years, I've been fortunate enough to work with such incredible, talented artists in the digital realm that I see it as a tool. It's the hammer that knocks the nail in, and it's always the person that is behind the tool, and that's whatever makes it great is what I will want to use for it.
That was a very good point where you say at the end of the day, it's a tool and it's up to the artist, the operator, the person behind it to make it come to life and make it express. I'm starting to, I said it before, it looks a bit like the cutting room floor. A lot of questions are falling down because we're actually running late, but let's try to have another question that is similar to one that I had by Tina, who says, now that everything can be made in VFX in photoreal, convincing quality, even humans to a certain extent, what from your perspective will be the big challenge in the field of VFX in the coming years?
One of the toughest questions. I mean, regarding challenges, there's always going to be challenges. One of my favorite examples is that remember James Cameron at some point wanted to do Battle Angel Alita a long time ago. And I remember going to Digital Domain back in the day, and it must have been around the time that they did Titanic, or even before that. And everybody was talking about Battle Angel at that point. Of course, it wasn't done at that point because they had to see that technology was not there at that point. Now you have the feeling that you can do anything and everything depending on the budget. And we're also now going into a field where it's going to be interesting to discuss. Well, we can also do lower budget movies, like the movie Moon that I mentioned earlier, where you can even work with the best of both worlds. But the challenges to me are always much more about not what can we do these days, but what can we do in a certain budget for a certain movie. Let's say you actually only have $2 million for the whole movie. Is somebody going to say like, hey, I give you half of it for visual effects? Certainly not. So maybe $200,000. How far do we get with that? Depending on what we want to tell in the story. And that is where it's going to get really interesting. You might have somebody who is so good in a particular software that you only need this one person instead of a 7-people team like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We had examples in Anonymous where we had one gentleman for our software, not our software, but the software Massive, regarding shots flying over the frozen River Thames with 20,000 extras and so on. But yeah, we had one artist actually doing all of that. And so those are the things that I'm very excited about in the future, that you can just do things also on smaller scale projects.
Very good. I have somebody who sent in 3 questions, so I'll ask one of those. And he writes, what do you think? Will future movies or even news reports be without real actors and on-site production eventually, or even soon?
Yeah, it's a difficult topic. The news reports, it always scares me, knowing what you can do these days. And that you don't even. That's at least my favorite part of this, to see where is this going, and can things be real, and can things be be fake? Or am I going off question here?
No, why?
Yeah. So that's just knowing that how fast you can actually do certain things and can use reports being faked and so on. I think right now regarding the speed that things come in, we're probably not there yet. But even on the limited series that I'm visual effects consultant on right now, there's a certain sequence that was filmed with a cell phone, and you have you see it several times in playback. It's all about the visual effects. It has to be created with visual effects, and it makes you think about it's something that you can actually do fairly quickly nowadays for real. So, right. Yeah.
Thank you. I wish we had more time, but there's one final question that I need to ask. In any case, it's by my boss, the FMX conference chair and the director of the Animationsinstitut, Andreas Yukade. And his question is, when will you and your producer wife, Gesa, visit Film Academy and do a workshop here?
I hope to do that very soon. Absolutely. I mean, let's see when this whole crazy time is over. I was a student at the Film Academy only for a little while, as I was then asked by Professor Ade to organize the animation department, at least the traditional side of it. The digital side, of course, was Thomas Hegele. And I had a fantastic time at the Film Academy. A year as a student, 4 years, I believe, it was, as in the teaching realm and organizing. So it's always great to come back. And when I come back, like last time when I came back and
let's just hope that once again Volker will come back, or maybe it's just the clock reminding us that we're a bit after the clock, but let's just finish that here.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. The last time I was there at the Film Academy, and I was shown a couple of things, that are now possible at that film school, which is sort of a dream come true for the students. Only talking about Dolby Atmos, sound mixing, and the studios, the digital possibilities that you have there, and this great team spirit. That's something, of course, I also love. So, give me a call. I'll be there.
Well, I guess kind of an offer you can't refuse. Well, I guess we have come to the end of the show. But before we say goodbye, we would like to play a trailer from the history of FMX that I think represents a great mix of creativity and technology. It's called Elemental, and it was used as the FMX trailer in 2017. It was directed by Adrian Meyer and a team of fellow students at Film Akademie's Animationsinstitut. So please enjoy Elemental. I guess you can see why we picked this. I feel that this trailer is right up your alley in a way, Volker. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Thinking about that, this was done at a film school is just absolutely mind blowing, because it's the most complicated particle effects you can think about with fire and water, etc. So I remember seeing this, and I also remember the live action performance that we got at the FMX when we were all there. Fantastic. Tipping my hat.
Absolutely. We have come to the end of the interview, and I want to say thank you very much to you, Volker, for spending time with us on the highlights of FMX 1994 to 2020 show. Thank you very much.
My absolute pleasure. Anytime.
I'm not sure if I should do this, but I want to mention something to the audience. When we started the show, I introduced you as somebody who has an Oscar and who is also a downright great guy. And I feel that there's like a little anecdote in there somewhere, because I know that where you're sitting right now, the room you're sitting in right now, is where you usually keep your Academy Award, your Oscar. So while most other people may have put the Oscar there for everybody to see it, you did exactly the opposite. Instead of keeping it there, you took it away just not to come over as a show-off. And I think that is telling us a lot about you. Again, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I think what I should do is pick up the questions that did land on the floor and see if we can repeat this some other time. Obviously, there's much more to talk about and go more into detail about as well. Instead of just having questions, it seems like it was a bit of a chat. It felt good to me. I hope it felt good to you. And in any case, again, thank you very, very much. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll do this anytime again. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. Should you have any suggestion or comments on the highlights of FMX, please write us an email to highlights@fmx.de, and we will do our best to include your feedback in our future program. European time, the FMX Conference Chair and Director of Film Academy's Animationsinstitut, Andreas Yucade, will be interviewing the Portuguese Animation Director, Regina Pessoa. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I hope we'll see you tomorrow.